going to talk about ancient brass instruments. What we're not going to talk about is ancient brass musical instruments, because most of these are sound tools which we use for the sound only. And we have to get one thing clear before we start. What we have to do is get away from the modern soundscape, because the modern soundscape is very different from an ancient soundscape, and we have to forget all the sounds that we hear around us. The ancient world was much quieter. There were the sounds of nature. We have to get away particularly from this idea of music being a tinkling piano or a mellifluous clarinet or anything like that. We have to forget those, because we have to clear them out, because we have to get into an ancient soundscape where most of the sounds were sounds of nature. The big sounds were sounds like earthquakes, thunderstorms, things like this. All these sounds, every one of these sounds had a god associated with them. So the sounds were not the sound of nature. An earthquake was not two tectonic plates clashing together. It was a god, because the god was angry with you. So all these sounds are not musical sounds. And if I slip into saying musical instruments, you can all say boo. Yes? Because they're sound tools. So what we think when they heard this sound? Can you do better? Yes, they didn't think it was Omer playing. They didn't think it was one of these things, because these things are washed up on the sea. They thought that that was the voice of a god. And inside here was the spirit that created that sound. So all these instruments we have to look at in a totally different light in order to understand what they mean. If we look at these instruments were very important for me. The Tutankhamun instruments. You can see through them. There's nothing inside. So what's inside? So somebody could not make a noise with a voice like this. This is very unfair on him. He's never played these before. So here we have a gain. It's changing the air that he blows into the voice of a god. Better, that's better. So where did that sound come from? That sound came from in here. Working on these instruments a few years ago, I was trying to understand what was in the mind of the people making these things. If we look on the instrument here, this is the silver. There's a copper one, or a bronze one, and a silver one. If we look at the bell of the silver one, it's decorated with the petals of a lotus leaf. You can see they're coming down here. Here is the cartouche of the king. Well, these are the three gods of Upper, Middle and Lower Egypt. This cartouche was rubbed off in order to put the cartouche of the king on it. So that this pattern of the lotus leaf was on the instrument before. Each of these instruments has a wooden stopper that goes inside it. When you see an Egyptian soldier marching, they're playing the trumpet like this and holding the wooden stopper in this hand. On the wooden stopper is this decoration of the lotus leaf. Now, in Egypt, there are two kinds of lotus leaves. There's a white lotus and the blue lotus. Blue is purple. Blue and purple are very special colours. They're the colour of royalty, the colour of gods. They're mystical things. The blue lotus is a sacred plant in Egypt. These are the leaves of the petals of the blue lotus. And the blue lotus is very special for one reason. It's important to understand this if we're going to try and understand what the trumpets meant in ancient times. The blue lotus does something very special. Every morning when the sun god rises, the blue lotus comes out of the water and opens up. It then follows the sun god along the sky. When the sun god goes over to the west, the lotus closes up and disappears into the muddy water. What it's doing is very important, because that water is the interface between where we live and where the underworld, where our ancestors live. When we go through that interface, we've gone. We're dead. We're finished. The blue lotus could do that every morning. So the blue lotus became a symbol of resurrection. a symbol of eternal life. So the blue lotus was a very, very special thing. On this instrument, we have the blue lotus. My theory, and it's only my theory, was that when they put this back inside the instrument, it went back to the ancestors. It revitalized that instrument, made it so that next time it spoke with the voice of the gods. If we look here, Handel said these words best of all: for the trumpet shall sound and the dead shall be raised incorruptible. Yeah. So this was the idea that when the trumpet sounded, the dead were raised again. So it was not just we think of a trumpet, a musical instrument. It was a sound tool which had these very, very special powers. We look at other things, animal horns, these things. Yeah. The thing, one thing I should have said about this at the beginning, that Omar played, the shell trumpet. These only come from warm waters, and they're found in the Mediterranean. And yet, those instruments like that, if you can hand hold it up, are found from the Neolithic, 8,000 BC, all over northern Europe, thousands of miles from where they were originally found. So these instruments were very, very special things, and they travelled long, long distances. These are ubiquitous. You find them everywhere. Yeah. So you naturally get a lot of instruments. This is actually the horn from the Lord of the Rings, you're probably guessing. So they're very common sorts of instruments. But the horn had lots of other meanings as well. The horn was really important. This lady is from about 29,000 years ago, Venus of Lausel, and she's shown holding this horn. This is the first representation we have of the horn. It's not a musical instrument, it's a horn. Yeah. What's significant about this horn is that, oops, I've gone the wrong way. It has on it 13 markings along there. There are 13-ish, 12.53 lunar cycles per year. So these are the markings of the lunar cycle. The horn becomes the sign of the new moon, and the new moon becomes a sign of the female. So all through prehistory, we find this horn as being the sign. And it represents the female because it represents this part of the pubic triangle. This becomes a triangle, becomes the sign of the female. It's present through all prehistory. So by this time, the horn has a meaning. It has a meaning which is already built into its shape. What's special about it? Well, this goddess, Astarte, Ashtar, Istra, all sorts of different names, all over the Middle East she was around. She was goddess of all sorts of things, particularly goddess of fertility, and she protected children during childbirth. Canaanite women used to walk around, pregnant Canaanite women would walk around with a little statuette of her to protect their unborn child. So all throughout history. This is an instrument I found 2 years ago. It's one of these things, a liturus. Can you hold a liturus for me? Etruscan instrument. I did a paper 3 years ago. I said that this was related to this goddess. I'd never seen that before, and then lo and behold, this turned up. It's clearly, this is a liturus, the shape of the Etruscan instrument. We'll be playing it later. So here you have clearly this sign. You see this sign in Diana, things related to the cult of Diana in Roman times. So this sign is really a very important sign. But the shape is important as well. And you get instruments like this. This is from Ireland. Well, this is a copy of one from Ireland. Late Bronze Age, about 780, 700-ish BC. The interesting thing about these instruments is they're found in pairs. And they're found in these kinds of pairs. One side blown like this, and one end blown like this. Yeah, so there's the end blown, there's the side blown. And it puzzled me for years and years why these were found in these kind of pairs. I call them complementary pairs. And it finally struck me, as I put other evidence together, that from these kinds of instruments, that this, of course, is the horn shape. So if this represents anything, if there's any complementarity in human existence, the main piece of complementarity is gender. And it's the gender between, it's male and female. So my theory is that these instruments are actually male and female. This represents the female. You've got that shape again. You've got an orifice here, okay, on some of them it's in the middle. This is the male instrument. This is the extension, phallic extension. The phallus is all over the place in the ancient world. It appears in the Neolithic, it appears not in Paleolithic. In the Paleolithic, all gods were female. And the male took over with the onset of agriculture, and they started to create male gods. Sometimes they took a female god and stuck a phallus on it and became male. Yeah, very crude, some of it. But this is one of the ideas of complementarity that I have. One of the interesting things is, in these instruments in Ireland, they found all over the island of Ireland, these instruments are, oh, it's here. These are typical northern instruments. That is a typical southern instrument that has these triangle things on the end. It has a larger wedge-shaped thing on the back. What is common along the island is the side blown and the end blown. The shapes are totally different throughout the island. What is the same is the complementarity of the two different kinds of instruments. Other complementary pairs. These are the lures. You see them on lure pack butter. They're from Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and North Germany. These are from Brudevelta. These were the first ones found in 1787. And they're in pairs. They're always in pairs, left and right. These are from Refheim in Norway. Again, a left and a right instrument. And again, it always worried me why you had a left instrument, why you had a right instrument. What was the complementarity? And then I found out during the late Bronze Age, men were buried lying on the right-hand side, women were buried lying on the left-hand side. So again, you have the gender thing. So again, my belief, and there's other evidence I don't have time to talk about. If we look at this instrument, I don't have one of these. This is a Maori instrument, Puterino. If you blow it here, it plays as a trumpet. If you blow it here, it plays as a flute. If you blow it here, it's male. If you blow it here, it's female. It's the shape of the spider moth, and the spider moth is in one of the myths of creation of the Maoris. So again, it's an instrument connected with fertility, connected with these ideas of creation. This thing here, this little horn, still used today, South India. Again, it's used as a fertility instrument. So when the crops are planted, they walk around playing this thing. Again, and you can guess what I say this instrument is, if it's male or female. I don't have to say anything there. So all the time we get these ideas. When I do this, and there are any sort of Jewish academics around, I get a lot of oohs when I do this. Because I think that the shofar is a vestigial female instrument. I wouldn't say this in an Orthodox synagogue, which will be carried out. But this is my view, and there's a lot of evidence for this. If someone attaches an extension to a shofar, it becomes non-kosher. It's an invalid instrument. So if you have a hole in the shofar, you cannot mend it if you add anything to it. This is pointing to the importance of the material it's made from. This is saying that the actual object itself is important. It's not the sound of it, it's the object that's important. It's the object that is holding within it this spirit. This is a Yemenite shofar, a bit longer one. My slave will play for me. Not bad for a beginner. You can actually on that thing play tunes. I bought that in Jerusalem, and I went round all the stores till I got one that had the harmonics in tune. And I was offered 2 jobs in synagogues when I was playing this on stand. So anyway, but again with shofar, there are 2 instruments in ancient Jewish tradition, and the other is the chatzotra, which is said to be very much like this instrument. 40 years after leaving Egypt, the Lord said unto Moses, make thee 2 trumpets of silver. Why did the Lord say unto Moses, make thee 2 trumpets of silver? They already had the shofar. It was an ancient instrument. It had to be for the reason that they needed this complementary pair of instruments. So I believe that again, the shofar and the chatotra are instruments. The chatotra was only played by the priests in the temple. No one else was to be able. That was a complementarity. I don't think it was necessarily male and female. It was one was a priestly instrument, one was an instrument of the commoners. When the destruction of the temple in 90 AD, when the Romans destroyed the second temple, the priest disappeared, the chatotra disappeared. So it's gone. It's no longer around. Where we are now, there was an instrument around called the carn. Well, we call it the carnix now. From my research, I don't think they called it the carnix then. It was a vertical instrument, held up in the air, had an animal head on the top. Though there was only, until 5 years ago, there was only one that had ever been found, and that was at Tattershall Ferry in Lincolnshire. And then this turned up about 5 years ago at Tintignac in southern France. This phenomenal hoard of 500 pieces of, pretty late, about 150 AD pieces. Among these pieces, you can see the head there of a carnix, you can see one of the tubes there, you can see another piece of tube there. Here you can see with some of the pieces, you can see the animal head, there you've got the animal head, there the bell, and there's these ears. These ears are this long. They're phantasmagorical things. This is one of the pieces put together, and this is not a very good picture, but this is made by a friend of mine in France from Poissy. This is a copy of it. It's actually made in brass. It's now made one in bronze. And this is John Kenny, who plays this instrument. But this was the one that was found in Britain. It was found in 1688. Sir Joseph Banks owned it. He was on the Beagle. He went on the Beagle trip, and he was a big collector. He was a very rich man. And he had this in his collection. It came from the river Witham. He commissioned a guy called Nats, a very good young artist, to draw it, and it's very good. I've looked at this scale very carefully, and this scale's within a few percent. So it's realistic to take this. These are the measurements we've put on it to analyse it, and this is a copy I've made of it. I made the copy exactly as was found. I didn't put the animal head on because the animal head wasn't found on it, and I didn't want to do anything that wasn't on the original. We didn't have the mouth, so where my hand is what we have. Now, what can you do on this? Well, it's a sort of trumpety thing. You can play fanfares on it. You can do all that sort of thing. Or you can go... You can just make noise on it. But quite fantastic noises on it. And the evidence is that in battle, there were hundreds of these things in battle. There were not just one or two at the front. And when the Romans talked about these battles, they talked about this really, really raucous noise. Now, if you imagine all these animals' heads making this noise, you can imagine yourself as a Roman. You've just walked 1,000 miles from the Mediterranean up to the North Sea. You've got on a boat, and 7 or 8 hours on this bloody awful water that's rocking you all over the place. You've landed on this place called Britannia, and it's always raining and it's miserable. And you walk, as soon as you leave a town, these people painted in blue come out the side, and they kill off anybody at the back. So when you get somewhere, there's only half of you left. And then they hear this sound. These are all done on this one instrument, yeah? That sound was me 200 times. Took me 5 weeks. Not really, but anyway. And that is what these instruments were. Not musical instruments. They were instruments for sound, for terrifying people. The Romans were just as terrified as anybody else. The Romans were very religious. Everything around the Romans, everything in the ancient world had meaning. Everything you touched had meaning. Everything you owned. And you didn't own many things, but it all had meaning, and it was all connected with gods and with what they meant. If we go to the Greeks, the Greeks... Actually, the Greeks are a bit boring when it comes to brass instruments. They made these instruments, these things called salpings, which were basically something like that. They took the instrument. The Greeks said that it was the Etruscans who invented the salpings. Now, the Etruscans clearly didn't invent the trumpet. The trumpets were around for a long time. You had instruments like this, which I don't think I've got a mouthpiece I'd play for you, but I've lost the mouthpiece, which is really just a straight instrument. They took something like this, which is a bell. They called it a codon. Codon in Greek means a bell. The bell was something very special to the Etruscans. The bell, they hung the bell on shrines because it was apotropaic. It warned off evil spirits. So you've got something here that warned off evil spirits. What would happen if you stuck that on the end of an instrument and made an instrument? You've got an instrument that wards off evil spirits. Yeah? It's pretty straightforward brass instrument. Can you give us a few toots on it? And yeah, is it music? Did the Greeks use it for music? The Greeks didn't use it for music, and the only person who really wrote about Greek music was a guy called Aristides Quintilianus, and he was quite late, 200 AD. And he said that the trumpet, he wrote, the trumpet was not part of musicae. The trumpet was not a musical instrument, it was a signal instrument. It was used in the Olympic Games. It was used to call the competitors to the games. It was used to start the race off. In the long race, it was used to sound the last lap. It was used to sound, to call, when somebody received the prize, it was given a fanfare. So it was quite important. And it was played by the Eleans. Eleans were the people who lived around Olympia. They lived around the area. 396 BC, everybody said, hang on, it's not fair that the Eleans always provide this person to sound the salpings. So from 396 BC, they initiated a contest. The first contest for 400 years in the Olympic Games was for the best salpings player. So the best salpings player was the one who officiated right throughout the games. So it was the opening thing. There were stories of a guy called Herodorus of Megara, very great big bloke who played this instrument, and he was the salpings player for King Demetrios Polyokites. This is coin of his, and this is Nike, the god Nike, blowing the salpings on the prow of the ship, showing that the instrument was connected always with gods. Athena, another god, had a cognomen Athena Salpings. His second name was Salping, showing the relationship of this instrument with the gods. Lastly, but not least, the Etruscans. I like the Etruscans. They were around from about 800 BC to about 100 BC when the Romans zapped them and they got absorbed into the Roman world. If you look at the early days of the Etruscans, the instruments were sound tools. If you look at the end of the Etruscans, I believe that they were musical instruments. This is a scene from a Roman mosaic. You see here a tuba, you see here a cornu, and you see here a hydraulis, an organ. So you have the instruments have made the change from sound tools into musical instruments. This is the tube of the chimneys, and here you see a cornu, a lituus, and here you see a cornu. This is a reconstruction, this is a repainting. Now we've got a few here, and we're going to give you a little tune on them, if you can find all the instruments. This is a TSMB Etruscan Allstars. This is the third rehearsal. What are we playing? Oh yeah. We only know one thing, so it's not difficult. Who's going to start instead? Because we did a concert at the British Museum a few years ago, and we started off playing. Anyway, I was told to finish now, and I'm happy to answer any questions anybody might have, if anybody's brave enough to ask a question. Silence.